Hello and welcome to the Spinal Cord Injury Forum. My name is Jeannie Hoffman and I am the co-director of the Northwest Regional Spinal Cord Injury System and a psychologist here in the Department of Rehabilitation Medicine. The forums, the video recordings, and all of our online media are made possible by a grant from the National Institute on Disability and Rehabilitation Research. Tonight we are very pleased to welcome 5 panelists who will be talking about their experience aging with spinal cord injury. Our folks here tonight, Jane Bogle, Melissa Espinoza, Jeff Shannon, Kirk Hennig, and Clark Landis, all have been injured from 29 to 63 years. And so collectively, we did the math, and there's 189 years of experience with living with spinal cord injury. Isn't that a number you should all be proud of? Yeah, it's pretty incredible. So we're very grateful to have them here tonight and for sharing their stories and their wisdom with us. We are going to be doing a little question and answer with me and them to begin with, and then I will open it up to questions from the audience. So if you could just hold your questions and I'll let you know when to chime in at that point. So thank you and welcome. So it'd be great if you guys could just start, and maybe Jane, you could start with just a brief introduction.
Well, I'm the person on the panel who has 63 years of experience with a spinal cord injury. I was born with a congenital spinal tumor that was removed when I was 2, and that surgery caused some paralysis and some lack of sensation. And in those days, the approach was, if it was at all possible, children were made to walk. So I grew up using crutches and wearing braces. And that's how I got around the world until I was 30. And at that point, I started using a wheelchair. And I'm now 65.
My name's Melissa, and I was born and raised in Idaho, and that's where I had my car accident at the age of 18, just 2 weeks after my 18th birthday. And I have a T12 L1 spinal cord injury. I just celebrated my 50th birthday in Vegas. What happens there stays there. And my friend Elaine was there with me to celebrate. And I'm having a tough time with I think I'm in denial and so about it. But actually being on this panel, when they invited me to be on the panel on aging, it was kind of a reality check. Okay, I'm getting old.
I'm Jeff. I'm playing the part of worst case scenario tonight. I'm 51. I was injured 2 weeks before my 18th birthday. And that was on a diving accident on Maui, on a beach in Maui. And C5-6 is my injury level, so 33 years post-injury. I guess that's it.
And I'm Kirk. My injury is also C5-6 from a falling object striking me on top of the head. I was injured 29 years ago.
These are young ones.
I am. That's a rare time. Yeah, just a couple of days ago, 29 years ago. Yeah.
And I'm Clark Landis, and I'm also a C5-6 spinal cord injury from a diving accident 32 years ago.
All right, thank you. So we did discuss the fact that this is about aging, and I guess my first question is, what kind of made you realize that you were starting to age with a spinal cord injury? I mean, all of you were injured fairly young, and so you usually don't think about it at that point. So at what point did that happen? So Jane, can we just start with you?
It happened for me when my non-disabled husband turned 70. And the experience of watching him get older, and I'm 6 years younger than he is, it suddenly dawned on me that this was going to happen to me and it was going to happen soon. It just cracked through my denial.
How about for you, Melissa?
I would have to say just some of the issues I've dealt with. One being some skin changes of trying to keep my skin moisturized on my tailbone area where it's prone to pressure sores. And then also right after my accident, my legs have atrophied, or they atrophied like within 6 months, and I really haven't had any changes except probably in the last year. I've noticed they've atrophied more, and my feet seem to be getting smaller. And the biggest one for me was being diagnosed with osteoporosis about 4 years ago, because I never even thought about it, and then just went for a regular checkup and was diagnosed, and that was a huge life changer. For me, it made me feel really fragile and vulnerable to falls or fractures, and kind of defenseless in being diagnosed with that, because you always think of it as somebody being in their 60s, 70s, 80s being diagnosed, and so I think that was the biggest one for me.
Jeff, how about you?
Well, I didn't think I was getting older at all, or didn't feel like I was. And then I found out a dirty secret from Kathy over here, and that is that, well, we've found that a lot of quads hit a brick wall at their 30-year mark. And so I'm sorry I'm revealing that now, but they don't tell you that when you're in rehab. So I did. I hit a brick wall after my 30-year mark, and I think it was probably unique in a way to, that where don't worry, because I think it's unlikely that these things will happen to anyone here. But I just had very serious problems going wrong with my bladder and going into autonomic dysreflexia with alarming and, in a couple of cases, near deadly frequency and severity. In the past, from the past 3 years are basically the time period that I've been dealing with aging, and I've noticed in that time, that there are things that I've gotten weak, that I used to do regularly that I don't do anymore. One of them, primarily, the way that I used to move around in bed was to sit up and push down like this, so then you could push down and get clearance with your rear end and move around in bed. Can't do that anymore, so I have to find all these weird ways to contort myself to do the same move. And then wrists and elbows are, they occasionally get quite sore, but there's quite a bit more to it than that, but that's it in a nutshell.
Kirk, how about you?
Still fighting that stuff, But actually, the thing that really sobered me up as much as any, I think, is watching my mom deteriorate after she had a stroke and ultimately died a couple years ago, and some of the things that they went through. My mom and stepfather both very active on the ranch into their late 80s, so that was the picture I had. I'd just stay active my whole life. And just about 2 years ago, the long head of the bicep tendon on my right arm tore, and so it's not attached any longer, and it's really affected my ability to transfer. So it's made me recognize that my physical abilities, whether or not I feel like I'm aging, my body's wearing hard.
Clark?
Well, it's vision. Isn't it for everybody?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, gosh, all of a sudden I needed cheaters, and, it was just like everyone else who's able-bodied or not. But, that realistically, though, that was kind of like, wow, I am starting to get old, because I never thought and worried too much about it. Though I've had issues go on in my life where, my quad life of rotator cuff surgeries and stuff like that, but they were mostly from injuries that set them off. So, but it really was like, all of a sudden your vision goes a little bit. Why am I more tired at the end of the day than I used to be? Some of the normal things that I think everyone goes through, and then that just starts making you think, what else? How, this body's worked hard to keep up with what it's done, and what else could start going. And so, now there's that going to the doctor for that seeing eye test and stuff like that. And so it's like, you're getting older.
So it sounds like for a couple people, independence has been impacted, and that's been important. But Jane, you talked about really watching your husband age has been part of that for you. And how does that make you think about your independence now and down the road?
Well, watching him age and actually understanding some of his orthopedic issues, like he has a torn rotator cuff. We've always been in a partnership where he provided me with an incredible amount of strength and service and encouragement and all the other things that our spouses do for us. And all of a sudden, we switched roles. And not only was he having several difficulties, but it meant that he wasn't able to do all that he'd previously done for me. So we're in the process of kind of renegotiating. How is that all going to look when I start having more difficulty than I'm having right now? So it's really changed how we function as a couple.
Has that been true for you too, Melissa, or not?
As far as independence?
Yeah.
I think the osteoporosis is, like I said, made me feel more vulnerable. I'm really cautious now, wearing shoes and then looking to see where my legs are at all times when I'm transferring. I don't carry a lot of weight on my lap anymore like I used to, or groceries. I don't let children sit on my lap, which is a real tough one for nieces and nephews. And you know how kids like to ride around on your lap. And I just worry about, fractures that way. And I put an anti-tip bar on my chair, so in case I have a fall. And I'm really cautious now. And so that's taken away some of my independence of being just really cautious about, my body and just making sure I don't have any fractures. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it has taken away some independence as far as just high-risk activities or anything that...
Right, so giving up some things that you didn't have to before.
Exactly.
Jeff, how about you with independence?
I've been blessed, really, that I've been as independent as I have. I've lived alone. I lived in the house where I grew up with my parents, and then at a certain, when it was good timing for me to leave, I got out, and even living at home, I was fairly independent, and that was sort of rehearsal for moving out and being on my own. And I live exactly, I have my own house right now. I'm really wrestling with part of the aging process is I'm really wrestling with the decision of whether the house is too much of a burden, because if you're in a house, you have to pay for everything and yard work and things like that. So, but I'm very proud about that. I'm hoping to continue staying there, and I've just set up my circumstances to maximize my own independence. And I think, in some ways, I've sacrificed things because I haven't had somebody around in the evening who might, be able to make things easier for me or whatever. But it's more than worth it to have had independence. And I still put myself to bed at night. And it's, like I say, it's kind of a contortionist act to actually do it. But I still do it. But those days are numbered. Mm-hmm. And so I'm looking at the decisions right now of what do I do? What are my future living circumstances going to be, whether it's some sort of assisted living down the road, or will it be living in an apartment on my own but having people nearby who can help, or having a live-in caregiver. So those are the decisions I'm wrestling with, but right now my status quo hasn't changed in 33 years.
How about for you, Kirk?
As far as independence?
Yeah.
Yeah. The biggest independence change, because thing like my elbow problem or a shoulder problem or syringomyelia is all temporary. I would rehab back out of it and regain that other than just morning care. But the tendon tear in my right arm changed it to where I need someone at night to at least supervise my transfer into bed. And recognizing that I'm probably faced with that, because I do live in my own home by myself. I have no family that lives there. That makes it more challenging. So. And what it also did is it recognized that not only do I have loss of privacy there, because that was my time, but it's also now I have to spend more of my energy managing them instead of doing the things I prefer to do.
Right. Yeah. So caregiver management has been something new that has been added in.
Yeah.
In a different way than it was before.
Do-it-derm doesn't solve that, you know.
What?
I was saying do-it-derm doesn't solve that. Kind of a pain in the backside. But, yeah. So.
You can't fix that one.
No.
Just with a little wound care. Excellent. How about you, Clark? Have you had any changes in independence?
I think most of mine has been since my rotator cuff surgeries, which I've had two. The last one was 10 years ago. And that really took away a lot of my actual independence, getting in and out of bed itself and moving on the bed. Once I'm there, then I can do what I need to do. But nothing's really changed per se for age. It's been, but I am more cautious, as Melissa said, with transfers. I don't move as fast as I used to because, okay, is this handhold right? And, you know, some of the maybe just being upright or stiff, or the bladder doesn't empty as much and there might be more tightness, that you make sure that you're safer each time you go, because maybe you don't catch yourself or recover on that transfer as quickly as you used to. So that's probably the biggest one, is just kind of moving a little. Maybe that's just wisdom too. I don't know, but you're supposed to get that when you're older.
You mean you got smarter?
Well, maybe, but probably preservation. But
yeah. Although I think I heard that from everybody earlier. I think wisdom has been part of the aging process, hasn't it? Now, a couple people have mentioned, and Jane, you mentioned right up front, of changing kind of your use of mobility tools. What was that like for you to go from trying to walk, and it sounds like it was quite effortful with braces and crutches and that, to a manual wheelchair?
I resisted it profoundly. It was the last thing I wanted to do. I felt like I was giving up. I've got a lot of, I guess when I look back on it, I would have to admit that it was really negative feedback from my family. They didn't want me to do it. They thought it meant I was getting worse, I was giving up, it would be embarrassing. It got back to that idea that you had to walk. No matter what, you had to walk. And I think some of that came out of the polio epidemics in those years. Remember, we're talking back into the late 1940s and the 1950s.
And this is all post-war mentality.
Yep. And when a child would survive polio, it was pretty common that there was an effort to make that child walk. And my parents had a very similar idea. So for me to give up walking was really traumatic. The other thing that was true, in those days, the city was not nearly as accessible as it is now. So in order to work and live the life that I wanted to live, it seemed that I was going to have to go on walking. And gradually, the city became more and more accessible, and it became possible to use a wheelchair. And after a couple years of transition, I thought it was just this incredible blessing, because my life just opened up once I was not struggling on the crutches. So it was a huge improvement to just the quality of my life. And my family finally adjusted.
probably after seeing you be able to do more things.
I think that's
Go
true.
more places.
Yeah, and there was not quite the stigma that they seemed to feel there would be when I first started talking about it.
Right.
So it's just, when I think back on it, it's hard for me to remember how difficult the transition actually was, but I think it was significant.
Yeah, I think those transitions are hard for everybody. And Jeff, I think you also had the experience of being in a manual chair most of the time and then making a transition. What was that transition like for you? Did you have the same struggle?
Yeah, that coincides with the 3 years that I've talked about. And I used a manual exclusively for 30 years. And I recommend that as much as possible, to try and use a manual when you can, and if you can. And I know I made a lot of sacrifices during those 30 years of not having the fun that you can have mobility-wise, as far as being, I was issued a power chair when I left rehab in February of 1980, and absolutely never used it. And I think it goes back to what you were saying, because it's just, I just felt this stigma of, you're in a manual wheelchair. It means you're mobile. You can get around. You can do things.
Yeah.
You're in a power chair. All of a sudden, to me, then I became much more disabled in the eyes of the world.
Yes.
And so there's a stupid pride thing attached, because I do think that for those 30 years, I should have had the option of using a power chair when I wanted it, instead of really seriously just discarding the power chair that I'd been given. And so there are huge benefits. I'm sure everybody here with a power chair knows what the mobility benefits are. And I've really suffered from the lack of physical activity. And I haven't yet compensated by using the manual chair, because as it stands right now, I cannot independently get myself to bed at night from my manual chair. The conditions aren't there for the bed, for the height of the bed, and so these are all things that could be solved. So the one thing that I could get off on a long tangent here, but as far as continuing to maintain independence, the one thing I would just really love to have is a roof track lift system. And that would be really great.
Right, so it's kind of come with both positives and negatives.
Yeah, I mean, I really, as Clark knows all too well, I've had probably more than the usual difficulties of transitioning to this chair, and I have pretty serious posture issues that we've all been trying to deal with in terms of PT, and finding a happy medium between balance and safety.
Yeah.
So it's been difficult.
Yeah. And Clark, I know you use both.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And I was a lot like Jeff said. I mean, I didn't start using a power chair till I wiped out my rotator cuff the first time by falling off my van lift. So, and that was about 15 years post, and I'd never used a power chair. Same reason. It was like Jane said, that was like giving up and giving into, being in a chair. And it's like, what it did though was open up tons of avenues, especially since my son was 5 then, and had a daughter on the way, and so then I was able to go out into the ball fields with him and go to the parks and get there myself and not have to be pushed, or make people run after me versus me trying to catch them or be a burden for them to push me. So I'm definitely with Jeff that the combination, if you're able to, just works phenomenal. And I use my manual chair probably 80% of the time. And then I'll probably be in my power chair almost all weekend. And it does a couple of things, and it's probably part of this aging thing too, is it definitely gives me a break with shoulders and pushing. I transfer different, so transfers are easier in the power chair than the manual chair. And I tend to do a lot more of my longer errands and stuff on the weekends. and am more active in that kind of stuff instead of just going to work and back home. So, yeah, I'm a big proponent of having two if you can. Yeah.
So, Melissa, have you ever thought about needing a manual chair at some point? A power chair at some point?
I did use the assisted wheels. They're like Elaine's that she has. That what do they call Elaine? Emotion Power Assist. And I did use those for about a 4-month period because of some shoulder issues I was having, and wasn't able to dress, or it just had a lot of problems where I had a tough time pushing my chair and maneuvering. And so I did get some of those. The only problem with those I had was I was driving a car at that time, and it limits you because they're so heavy. And to try and pull those off and put in a car, now I have a van, so it wouldn't be an issue. But at that point, driving a car, just the combination didn't work for me. So I just used them for a short time, and then once my shoulders started feeling better and healing up, then I haven't used them since. Mm-hmm.
Do you, like Clark, transfer into a driver's seat?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. To my van.
Kirk, how about you? Had you ever, given that you're the same level, did you also leave with a power chair or get recommended to have
It was
both?
recommended that I have a power chair when I left by a physical therapist, and I declined.
Yeah.
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 And it's been very successful up until recently, and that's, you asked me about how has aging affected my independence also, and I omitted incorrectly that maybe the largest beyond, it's related to transfers, but beyond just having someone at my home at night is the car transfers, because I use a 2-door car, and I load the chair behind the driver's seat. And the car transfers are really tough for me. And the shoulder depressors are what I've relied on for doing my lift. And for some reason, that's not functioning very well for me now, even though physical therapy, work, exercise at my house, my muscle structure is bigger, but the functional lift is not there. And my astute buddy may have nailed it earlier in a conversation, pointed out that part of this started for me when I had a syringomyelia, about 10 years after my injury. Compromised my right arm then, so.
It's so hard to sometimes get things back when they've already been problematic.
Yeah, there's been neurological impact a couple times. The initial injury, the syringomyelia, and then some peripheral aspects too. But
So you're talking about tingling?
Yeah, I have that, but also sensory's been lost. A lot of times I don't have sensation until clear up in my jaw, normal sensation,
Right.
where I should be more like this level, which is where I started.
Right.
So we
So
know
you've
the
had change in
syringomyelia is
sensation.
involved,
Yeah.
but it has a drain. Is it working, not working? Is it affected strength? We don't know.
Right.
So, but transfers, that's the big reason that I might consider a power chair. Clark also pointed out that maybe some of my resistance that I have not factored in is that it would also affect my transportation.
Right.
Because I use a car, I would need to ditch that, switch to a van.
Right.
I don't
Big
think
change.
you'd regret it.
Can I just add that is why I did get a van, because I was having a lot of shoulder issues, and I had driven a car for 26 years, and once I got the van, I was concerned about the maintenance of the conversions and the parking, and so, which I had heard about all the time, but I'll tell you what, it was the best thing. My husband's the one that talked me into it, because I vowed I would never, ever drive a van. I was always into sports cars, and then going from a sports car to a van, but you know what, I love it, and I would never give that van up. It totally changed my life, switching to a van. So it made a big difference health-wise.
Right. So
they're
sometimes
just
when you
better
say
than ever
never,
now.
it just means not until.
Pardon me?
I said sometimes when you say never,
Right.
it means not until. Yeah. So, people have talked about the difference between health problems and aging. And Jane, I believe you had some health problems that actually led you to choose to retire early.
That's true.
Yeah.
I retired 11 years ago from a job that I found to be increasingly demanding. And there were several concerns, I guess, about what would happen to me physically if I stayed in this particular position. So I retired trying to kind of preempt all the problems that I was expecting that would occur. And in some ways, I was psychologically too young to retire, and I had a difficult time with that transition as well. But thinking back on it, I do believe the decision was right because I have been fairly healthy since then and able to stay on top of the problems that I expected might happen. But I think, like several of the panelists have alluded to, there's always this fear of the next shoe dropping. And we're all, I think, pretty aware of what the problems will probably be. So it does put you into a certain, well, Melissa said it, that there's a sense of vulnerability. And even if it hasn't happened yet, you think it might. So I think it was probably the best decision to have retired. And if a nice little part-time job would come my way that I could do at home, I would grab it in a minute. I have never been completely happy not working.
Right.
So
it's been good for your health, but maybe not as
right.
much for your psychological
I think that's
health.
true.
Yeah.
I think that's true.
Yeah.
Because it does get back to the idea that if you're a disabled person and you work, you're not really all that disabled. Again, it sort of, I think, speaks to attitudes that I grew up with.
Yeah, absolutely. So Melissa, you're still working, and do you work full-time or part-time?
No, just part-time for my home, actually.
Yeah. So how has health and you mentioned shoulder issues and osteoporosis and things, some health issues that have come up. How has that affected your work life and work decisions?
Overall, I would consider that I've been pretty healthy. Like you said, just the normal health issues with the spinal cord injury, of the shoulder issues or elbow or pressure ulcers or just those kind of issues. But when I was injured 32 years ago, I made a choice at that point in my life that I wanted to stay healthy. And so I've probably gone to the other extreme where I do whatever I can to stay healthy. I mean, there's things beyond my control, just with having a spinal cord injury that I have no control over. But there's a huge part of my health that I have total control over. And those are the things that I think I focus on a lot, is to try and I've always worked. There's a short period where I didn't work in my life, but I've always gone to school or worked the whole time I've had an injury. And I love to stay active, and I love to stay, like to be very social. And so, like I said, I made the choice, and I think it's really paid off, besides the fact of things I have no control over.
And Clark, I know you're still working. Have you had any changes?
Well, I think I kind of alluded to it before. I mean, it's maybe harder to put in the 50 hours a week that I have forever in a day. I think I noticed it more when I had, 3 years ago, I had a car accident that really affected my back, and that was just brutal, more with pain and posture stuff that really wiped me out. But like I said, I'm just a little bit more tired than I used to be. I mean, I'm 50 now, and it's not like I'm 30, and so, but I still, typically that's a week for me, so, and I just may not go home with this much energy, but I still put in the work.
Right.
But I think about that. I think about it a lot, as Jane has, is that, how many more years do I have to put in this kind of time? I had a colleague of mine once who said to another colleague, well, they were older than I was by about 10 years, and they said, well, Clark, he's going to keep going on. And she says, yeah, but Clark's working on dog years here a little bit, so. And, you know, I heard that, I went, huh, and then I go, she's kind of right. You know,
great.
so, I mean, when you think about your day starts much earlier if you're independent in bowel and bladder care and getting yourself shower and all that, and, you know, my day starts at 4:30 in the morning to get to work, and then, you know, I'm in bed around 10 o'clock, so, you know, you do the math, that's a long day.
It's a long day.
And when a couple, 3 hours of that is just to get out the door, so maybe it's not dog years, it's just I used some of those years doing something else that
Right.
other people would have been working.
Right. Absolutely. And Kirk, I know you've been retired for a bit. Is that
Forever.
accurate? Forever. Oh, you worked for a while.
No, that's
there.
true. I did. I worked after my injury. I was working when I got injured, and then long rehab at that time, about 7 months, and then I went back to college, got another degree in building construction, which wasn't necessarily the best thinking because construction starts pretty early in the morning, and that wasn't a good fit. So I went into consulting work or design engineering work out of college and did that for a period of time and then taught and then consulted after that for about 10, 15 years and managed a small education program. When my associate mentor in that, our endeavor to go create this curriculum, died unexpectedly, some of my joy of doing it left, and I didn't need to do it at the time. I was very financially secure, so I elected to quit. And I need about another tech bubble or two, and I'll have to go back. But, you know, other than that, I'm hanging on, retirement here. So.
Did you have
I
any
did a lot of
struggles
volunteer work, though.
yeah, I was going to say, did you, so it sounds like you found kind of other work to do in terms of volunteering.
True.
To
And-
kind of fill in, because
yeah.
same issue of wanting to keep busy.
Yeah,
and-
exactly. And then I think that the impact of my tendon tear has been that I've not been able to carry on with the volunteer work that I did at that level, and that bothers me
Right.
a lot.
And Jeff, I know that you're still doing some work.
I'd do anything to retire right now. Again, we kind of go back to the theme of the past 3 years, has forced me into semi-retirement, which I, at this point, would like it to be full, but I'm just doing a small amount of work right now, which is still satisfying. I've been really lucky to do something related to what I love for my entire professional career. I was sort of like you in that, I had made a conscious decision that I wanted to work in the able-bodied world, you know, not to deny my disability, but just to get, you know, in there into the workspace. Great jobs at Microsoft, a great job at Amazon, but after that, it was like, I'm not going to do that anymore, because that, if you want to call it the rat race or whatever, but when you know, if you've got a busy traffic commute and you're going into, you know, these very, you know, high-speed environments with a lot of overachievers, the stress is pretty amazing, you know. And I was happy, actually, to get out of that, and I've worked at home for the past 10 years.
So it's worked out well.
Yeah, and the social aspect is a drag. If you're going to work at home, and this is, I always say, if you're going to be a quad, the best time to become a quad is tomorrow, because the everything is improving, and you know, even with just the release of the iPad, there is so much more that quads can do, and there's so much productivity that you can do. But if you're going to do something where it's in your best interest to work at home or to work in some stress-free way, then do that, but get your social life together as well.
Yeah. So important to reach out. Yeah. So question about, is there anything you wish you would have known or wished you would have done differently? Start with you, Clark.
Wish I would have known, as far as...
Or wish you would have done differently in terms of from the time you were injured to now, or something that came up along?
Gosh, you know, those of you who don't know me, I am an ATP, so I sell wheelchairs and custom wheelchairs and more in seating and positioning. And so my life really evolves around that, my world, how I want myself to sit in the chair and how you sit. And the biggest thing I can tell people is to keep their posture as correct as you can sitting in your chairs. And I wouldn't say that I wish that I did something different, because that's what I do, and I like that part of it. But I would just want to make sure that everyone who's out there who's using chairs, that if something, get your checkups, do the things that you're supposed to do, see the doctor, see your rehab doctor, see your therapist, make sure you're sitting, and because it affects, for us aging, it affects your skin, and how you sit in your chair. It affects how your back, everything starts getting a little weaker as you grow older, and it affects that. So if you're not sitting right, then it's just going to deteriorate that much faster. And I've just seen it with a lot of patients. I saw it start with myself and worked really hard to get back away from some problems, like with a scoliosis, or using one arm more than the other, and being conscious of what's going on. And a lot of times you need other people to help you do that. You can't do and see that on your own.
Yeah, no, I mean, Clark has you've preserved that, your posture amazingly. I'm kind of the opposite case, and I'm one of the folks you're probably referring to, and that is that in some, I think it's just body type with gravity, combined gravity and body type, and I have what's called the classic quad, slump, or quad pouch, where you're kind of sitting and your gut kind of goes like this. And I see it on other people, but anyway, I didn't mean to, it's just, prevention is huge. It's such a huge part of this, is just living as healthy as you possibly can.
So Jeff, is there things that you wish you would have done differently? Or do you feel like you kind of did everything you could do?
In a way, yeah. I look back at the whole time of how independent I was, and this gets to something that Kirk mentioned, which is that rehabs of 6 to 8 months were not unusual in the 70s and 80s. Mm-hmm. And now, I mean, I don't think it's just tragic. I think it's criminal that guys are being sent home after, in some cases, 90 days. And
or less.
You cannot be equipped to fully meet the challenges of your life if you haven't been pistol whipped into shape by a good PT. And I had a taskmaster, and my independence was entirely due to being whipped into shape. And those were on days where I would yell at him, and I'd say profanities, and he didn't let up. And of course, those are the people that you remember most fondly for having contributed to your independence.
So true.
That is so true.
Melissa?
Oh, I just said that's so true.
Yeah. So how about you? Is there anything you wish you would have done differently, or wish that would have been different?
Not necessarily done differently. One thing is that when I was injured, I was in Idaho, and so I didn't really have a network. I think it's so important to cultivate a network of people with similar injuries, because for like the first almost 10 years, I didn't really know anyone. There was one gal I used to talk to from Texas, but I really didn't have a network of people with similar injuries. And then I met my friend Elaine, and she just totally changed my life. And it's just all of them, the people I've met have played a real instrumental role in my personal growth and learning from them. And still to this day, I learn new techniques or treatments, or just tap into networks of people that can help you and use as a resource. And I think that is so important. And I missed out on it for almost 10 years and didn't realize how much I needed that in my life, and needed to have friendships, male and female, that had similarities that I could tap into.
The reason I said the best time to get injured is tomorrow is because of all the positive changes that have taken place. And like what you were just talking about, all of these instructional things that quads do and the way quads do different things differently and how you can learn from each other, it's all on YouTube.
Exactly.
And now somebody it's either being done or is done already, has created a website to consolidate all of the disability videos that are on YouTube.
That's great.
And so the amount of instruction and the examples that you can see, if that had been existed in 1979, I mean, that would just be a whole new thing.
Yeah.
When I was injured, all you had was the local library. And I'm from Idaho, and so they didn't have any information or literature on spinal cord injuries because I went and did research, and I didn't have access to a computer or internet. So basically, where else are you going to learn?
Yeah.
And if you've ever seen the disability sex movies of the, of the
from
70s,
the 70s,
it's like, you don't want to go there.
Hey, I think we still show that. Jane, how about you? Is there anything that you think of that you wish you would have done differently or you think people really need to know?
Well, I would have hooked up with a good adult rehab program a long time ago. And my history has been whenever I would have a disability-related health calamity, then I would call up Barry Goldstein. And I'd go in, I'd see him, he'd fix it, or we'd fix it together, and then I would completely drop out of that whole community. And I think that's been really foolish. And again, it might be a little bit of denial, like I didn't need this kind of special, extraordinarily talented group. 3 years ago, I injured my foot on a scooter. It was an accident, and ended up with a non-healing ulcer. And I spent 2.5 years with other physicians who really didn't know very much about the impact of my paraplegia on this particular prospect of trying to heal this ulcer. And finally, one of them said to me, maybe you should go to Harborview, maybe you should sit down with Dr. Goldstein and have him take a look at this and see if possibly they can heal it. And of course, they did. And the experience was, in many ways, was really important because it was the first time in probably 10 or maybe 15 years that I understood everything that can happen in that adult rehab center. And so now I'm really plugged in there, and I intend to stay plugged in.
I was just going to ask, are you going to go
back?
Oh,
yeah, I am. And I just think that I was very ignorant about what was possible if you became an ongoing client there, patient there. So I would really do that differently.
Absolutely. Other advice that you would give to people who are younger or more in the early years of injury, maybe not younger age, but...
Well, I would echo what Jane had said was staying plugged in. I was kind of that way too, where, and I'm very fortunate, I was young and I didn't need very much. I kind of did back in the day, you would go back once a year and actually then you would go in for a week. I mean, you didn't just go for 4 hours of the day and do a spinal cord checkup rehab thing. But, and then shortly, probably within 2 years, I just kind of bailed out of the system and wasn't seen for a long, long time. In fact, I just had a doctor that I went and saw, and I just kind of told him what I needed and went in if I did. But I think it's real important to be plugged into a rehab center with the specialist and to do that yearly evaluation go and get your kidneys looked at, your bladder. Just talk with someone about, so they can ask you the questions and maybe prompt you that, yeah, things have changed a little bit. Well, yeah, the shoulder does hurt a little bit, or yeah, there is that little scrape that's just not really healing. And those are things that in a busy, active lifestyle, you just go through it and you don't really pay that much attention sometimes. Though I think most of us in chairs will tell you that you get pretty in tune with your body and you pay attention to the things that you think are important, but sometimes you may not think that they're all that important. And so I'm a big proponent of staying in tune with the rehab centers now and making sure that you're getting their expertise out of it too.
Kirk, do you
I
have?
agree with that.
Yeah.
That, you know, but part of it is we've been talking about us aging, but the other challenge, I think, and I've been involved with the Spinal Cord Society, but also rehab here at UW since my injury. My initial trauma was at Harborview, treatment there. I transferred promptly here, did all my rehab here, stayed with the same attending physician until she didn't retire, but she relocated. That was, oh no. And then the urologist did retire. He was the only expert, and his protege came along pretty quick and then went to private practice. So what's happened is that a lot of the good, I mean, truly long-term knowledge-based professionals that solve our daily life problems and pick up, and they know to ask the question, how's your shoulder? How's your skin? How's this? How's that? How's getting in and out of the car? Where a newer person doesn't automatically ask those questions. They can have just as good an intent, that healthcare provider, but they may not be as comprehensive. Our network is transitioning in their life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like it's a combination of figuring out how to be an expert in yourself and also find good experts to give you good advice, but also recognize that there's limits on both sides.
No, there are, and they're going to go, and rightfully so. The good thing is that we do now have at the UW peer mentoring. Some of us are involved in that. I think it's a great thing. And we have a rehab advisory council where we can give input to the rehab program.
Yeah.
And the UW Med Center has been very, right to the very top, has been receptive to our comments, and change has happened. Those have been real positive things. But it takes time, and there's those voids in between where I think, along with Clark, our longer-term stays for our annual evals were far, far better than 0.1-hour appointments, 3 or 4 of those. I'm convinced that there were proactive things for shoulder balancing that might have helped me avoid some of the damage to mine that would have likely been picked up with a longer annual evaluation. Yeah. On a personal basis, advice, only one person did I give advice to about, make choices when he's young, because he's same injury as mine, great guy, I love him, but he's about 25 years younger than me, or 20 now. And I met a person doing a study, and I phoned him up, and I said, you got to go meet her, you got to go out with her, and they did, and they're a couple and all that. And I chose not to do that, and through my life, I was a lot independent, and I went through people looking for, when my life would get better, I'd make the better choices, and then I'd continue to age, and then my life is the goal of having children and a family, that's gone. So, yeah.
So don't wait.
That's true. Yeah.
Live your life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jeff, do you have advice?
Yeah, I just think it's absolutely important to recognize and realize that, if you get a spinal cord injury, you've just been handed a huge personal responsibility. It's not nobody else's responsibility. You have, and this is something I said to Jeannie earlier, is if you're disabled, especially if you're using a wheelchair and you have a spinal cord injury or anything serious like that, Mother Nature wants to kill you. And we are, it sounds extreme to say this, but we are all being kept alive by artificial means. Antibiotics, whatever it is that you need to stay healthy and alive, and whatever it is you need to maintain what's going on with your body, it's all on you. And you can neglect yourself, and you can let your skin rot away, you can let your bones break, you can do crazy things. That's fine, but you'll pay the price, and you'll die young. And so that's it. Just take a big responsibility for that. And you talked about it's true on both sides. Understand that we have the Rolls-Royce of spinal cord injury facilities here, and they don't have all the answers.
Absolutely. How about you, Melissa?
I agree with them as far as being an advocate for yourself, and also agree with the health choice of just making that choice of staying healthy, because no one else is responsible but yourself, and how important it is to make that choice. And it's a lifelong journey, and it's sometimes can be very overwhelming and frustrating, but it does pay off in the end as far as what you have control over. And another one is to take pressure ulcers or wounds very serious. They aren't anything to take lightly, because they I've dealt with one on and off for several years, and it's amazing that when you stick to what the doctor says, and offloading and eating right and taking supplements and drinking lots of water and eating a balanced meal and protein, it makes a huge difference than years ago when I had one and I just ignored all that, and then waiting for a year for it to heal and couldn't understand why it wasn't healing. And I know every circumstance is different, but it does make a difference if you listen to the doctors and what they tell you, especially for skin issues. I think that's so important.
One thing I wanted to add to that is that the editor of, I'm assuming that most, if not everyone here, knows about New Mobility magazine. Mm-hmm. Well, the editor of New Mobility just had his left leg amputated because of what started as a dime-sized sore on his leg. And it wouldn't heal and wouldn't heal and wouldn't heal, and it just cratered to the point where you're looking at bone and infected. And at certain points, some of these things kind of hit the point of no return, right, and the infection might take over. 3 of my quad friends have died in the 33 years that I've been a quad, and so this is connected to another piece of advice I have, and that is subscribe to New Mobility for the rest of your life.
That's a good,
Jane, how about you? What advice do you have for people?
Well, again, I'm the oldest person on this panel, and I guess it's important to recognize when non-disabled people hit age 65 that they also are starting to deal with really serious health issues. And I feel like, because I've lived with this disability for 63 years, that I have developed over those years a lot of coping skills that we've all had to develop in order to survive this long, that friends of mine who are now 65 and starting to develop big deal health problems don't have. And they're having to start to build those same coping skills at a much, much later age than I had to do this. So it's been useful to me to realize that we're not so alone, especially as we get older. And I think that that's been important for me to, it's a kind of equalizer in a sense with other people who are aging. So I like to keep that in mind.
Absolutely. So I want to let other people have an opportunity to ask questions. Does anyone in the audience have questions? She brings up an interesting kind of point about denial. And I think you all have kind of talked about that in different ways. And it's in some ways it's really helpful to kind of be able to keep focused on day to day. But on the other hand, it's also gotten in the way at times. Do you guys have any thoughts on, does anyone want to speak to that?
I'm not sure I mean, you can tell me if I'm lying or not, but I haven't felt that I've ever been in any kind of denial about the injury and about the consequences and the responsibilities.
So for you, it's been very much
concrete
and focused.
Yeah.
Jane, how about you? You kind of mentioned that that was part of your avoidance of kind of the rehab world.
Yeah, I think that I grew up on denial. I think that it was a really strong message when I was a child. And I have always believed that your whole life shouldn't be your disability. So in some respects, a little bit of carefully controlled denial, I think, is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
I mean, not to the extent that you're
don't-
going to throw your health down the drain.
But what I think what you're saying is don't let it define you.
Yeah.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And sometimes denial, again, when it's controlled and it's minimal,
Healthy.
isn't a bad thing.
Yeah.
I think it's really important to realize that it can have an excellent function in one's life occasionally.
I would agree. I would
Yeah.
agree. It's just figuring out when the line is.
Exactly.
When it's
And the
starting
older
to
you
hurt
get, the more that line is really critical.
Hi. So there's a lot of experience here, just day-to-day experience that, it's impossible to convey in this format or in any format really, especially with, other members of the audience who've also been injured for many years. And something you can't convey is the day-to-day mechanisms or adversities that you might encounter, from the absurd to, trying to open that door on the way out to more serious things like elevators and day-to-day minutia, which were probably more significant, back when you were first injured. Most definitely were more. But also to major health issues like your shoulder surgeries and other things that were just a result of getting older, osteoporosis and whatnot. It's hard to say or hard to ask, what helped you through it. But if you could, you mentioned, Jane, your coping mechanisms were a bit more sophisticated than others in your peer group regarding those type of adversities. Are there things that you could glean from your experiences that kind of, might be helpful for someone who just been injured or have been injured, just a few years down the line, or maybe not even with an injury, but having some difficulty in their lives?
Jeff, speak to that.
Well, I just, what I would say is, first and foremost, the day-to-day of being a quad is lousy. We've all been dealt a real crappy hand of cards. And the only thing that redeems that is how you respond to it. And, if you're going to be ranting against the world for the rest of your life, then be that way and make everybody else miserable, and that's all well and good. And then you can go and cry in the corner for the rest of your life. The other thing is just, I think it's just very, very important every day to be engaged in whatever it is that you're interested in and find a passion and stick with it and do something that gives you purpose. Because, I'll tell you right now, I've been in depths of despair over the past 3 years that are way more than I ever thought I could handle. And I've been really at my lowest. And but the one thing I've said to Jeannie about all of this is that one good strategy for your life is just to give yourself things to look forward to, even if it's, like in my case, I'm looking forward to this movie Cloud Atlas, so at least I know I want to stick around until October 26th, so I'm seeing Bob Dylan this Saturday with Mark Knopfler, so do something, put something on your agenda or on your calendar that's going to make you look beyond the misery of a bad day, because it's true of able-bodied, it's true of every single person on this planet. You're going to have good days and you're going to have bad days. And my worst days are related to my physical condition. So if I have a lot of spasms and a lot of pain, some of which is happening to me now, you just, last week, a week from tomorrow, last Wednesday was a very, very bad day for me. And basically I just watched movies and tried to ignore it, and got up the next day and felt better, But you're going to have really, really bad days. And that's why it just becomes crucial to take an interest and latch onto it and give yourself a reason to look forward to the next day.
Anybody else, Melissa?
I was going to say what has helped me through the 32 years is my spiritual life. It's something I really feel like my life was spared because I was in a really, traumatic accident, or I guess where I came this close to losing my life, and I feel like there was some reason why I didn't. And the guy, my boyfriend that was in the accident, his life was taken. And so for me, I get up each day and look at life as a blessing that I'm here. And that is what gets me through, is just tapping into the strength and the faith that I get from my spiritual life. And it's worked for me personally. And I just have always tried to look at things in a more positive way. And I know that doesn't work for everybody, but it's worked for me and has really helped me get through the last 32 years.
Did anyone else, Clark or Kurt?
Yeah, I was going to say that I agree with Jeff of staying busy. Find something, whether you decide to go back to work or whether you, was always very appreciative of Kirk for ever and a day up until just recently. We had trouble getting around all the volunteer activities that he did continually. He found something else to do even though he wasn't working anymore. For me, I also have a wife and kids, and so that keeps me very busy and active. And you just pour your life into them as much as you can, that you're not working. But also, I think that, telling someone who's newly injured or is trying to figure out what they're going to do after they're injured is, you can do pretty much what you thought you were going to do before. You can go to school if that's what you want to do. You can work. You can get married. You can have kids if you want. I mean, it's all that's open, and then you make the decisions of what you want to do. And I don't think there's much else that, the avenues that are out there today, it's like Jane even said, even with accessibility today. That's not just physical, it's the accessibility of boundaries that have been broken down. So the opportunities are all out there. So it's a matter of just taking those and running with them. It's easier today, as Jeff said, or tomorrow than it was back when we were first injured. So,
I think you used the term guinea pigs for aging with me when we spoke on the phone.
well, and you know, I've said that to people before too, and that you mentioned, Jeff, that no one has all the answers, or that Kathy said you're going to hit the wall at 30 years and no one's ever going to tell you that when you're first injured. Well, they didn't know that when we were first injured,
Right.
because there weren't enough of them, people around to know that. So I have said that we are kind of like the guinea pigs of the spinal cord era out there, because there's a huge population of spinal cord injuries over 30 years now, where there wasn't when Jane hit 30 years. You know.
Another thing,
so
Kurt,
true.
was, we all were, but you know, some of the volunteer stuff that Kurt did was, he mentioned the Spinal Cord Society, which is one of many groups in the country that support cure research, and is actually the Northwest branch was started by my mother. And one very, very, very important thing I would like to say about that is be interested in cure, follow that if you are interested in it, and know what's going on. Don't ever get obsessed with cure. Because being interested is being engaged and being responsible for your future and taking an interest in all that. Being obsessed is just tragic.
Yeah.
So true.
Yeah.
Kirk, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think that one of the things, I heard Jeff talk about, well, he's aiming to be here in a couple weeks. But not to joke about that, but I think one of the mistakes we make is to look out, okay, I'm going to go get this degree, or I'm going to take that class, I'm going to do, but we fail to make the longer range plans. And I was told this not too long after I got injured, that it was very common to look out 2-3 years and think about where might we be then. I think for people as a whole, but really for wheelchair users at the time, was the conversation I was in. But I find that that's a mistake I've made. I've made some life plans a couple of times, and then I've allowed them to be shelved by other interruptions that I've focused on really hard, and then when I came back to it, what was my plan again? And that's unfortunate, because when we get injured, particularly if we get injured where we need home health care, like typical at our level is very common, few people have management training, particularly when we're in our early 20s, which is what we were, or...
Now we're experts.
Well, at least in our own. Mm-hmm. And the fortunate thing is that there are people who have created materials to help people learn. And there are better mechanisms to help you learn to become a manager. But there's also, I think, opportunity for some interactive counseling, perhaps your area, psychological things. It's not easy to ask for help when you can't figure out, you're like, what the hell? I don't know what's going on here. Why am I this? Why am I that? Yeah. So.
Jane, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Well, this is just really an underscore, particularly of what Jeff was saying, but I have always believed that living well is the best revenge, and that if you find something that really intrigues and focuses and stimulates you, such as I think, Jeff, you particularly have, go for that. And it's that experience outside of yourself that keeps you balanced. And I think that we all have really bad days, and we all know that the next day isn't so bad. So that's like anybody, and perhaps with us it's a little bit more, in a little bolder relief. But I think it's important to remember that we're not that different from people who do not have disabilities. So I guess I look at the rest of my life as being a great adventure. I just figure if I've gotten this far, the rest of it's probably going to work out.
Thanks. Well, let me start by saying I'm 72, and I was injured when I was 11 years old. So it's been a lot. It's, 60 plus years.
You almost beat me, Julie.
Yeah. I'm healthy. I'm relatively independent. I do get a little help now, and have for the last year or two. But I'm a high-level para. I was a quad initially, and but then I did get return of my arms. I was very fortunate that way. But I just wanted to emphasize something that one of you said, that developing my faith has been very important to me in this journey. Knowing that I'm spiritually grounded, whatever that may mean to you, I think has been kind of the cornerstone of the rest of my life. And developing positive relationships. I think people, and especially with other disabled people. When I was first injured, I didn't really want to be defined by my disability, and I didn't want to have too many other disabled people around me. But I've found, and I think as we all have as we've aged, that these have been some of our most valuable relationships, that we learn from each other, that we can commiserate, complain when we feel like it, because of course we'd never complain among able-bodied people because they think that's what we should be doing. So that's been a very important part of my development and my aging process.
To look at you five and to hear you talk is just really, really inspirational in part. The other thing I want to say to everybody else here in the chair, get out of your house. Yeah. I mean, I go to the Seattle Center, I go to all the kind of events on the weekends. I don't see but maybe one other person. I go to movies, I go to a lot of happy hours. I go to as many restaurants as I can get to, and I don't see anybody else in the chair. And I think, where are you hiding? Come on. There's more of us. We gotta make a vision and a presence of ourselves. We're a proud bunch, and we are capable as all get out. Let's say that. So, be yourself. Thanks much for the night. It was very, very fine.
Would you join me in a round of applause for our fantastic panel?